Hello once more and welcome to the Knights Templar Church. This is Reverend Steve Chriscole bringing you the sermon for today, which is entitled Being Queen. Now, as you can probably realise that my sermon today is being affected by the death of Queen Elizabeth II of the UK, of Britain, and being British of a certain age, this has been on my mind quite considerably this week. Now, obviously I'm going to say that surprisingly, to me anyway, I've been somewhat affected by this unhappy event. I mean, I never met her, I never saw her in person, but I know that she's missed. And I also know that there are an awful lot of people who dislike royalty, and there are many more people who have criticisms about the kind of person she was, or what she did, or about the royal family in general, and what they represent. None of those things bear any relation to what I'm going to speak about today, because I'm interested in the person of Elizabeth and who she was, and to some extent what she represents. So, for me, personally, she's been one major constant for my life in Britain. She was crowned queen before I was born, and that's, obviously that's 60-something years that she's been part of my life. I've seen lots of things on the TV, comments that she personally has made, things that have been written about her. Obviously, many things that if you read a newspaper, you don't believe an awful lot of what you read in there. But over the time, you see snippets of information that give you an inkling into the character of the Queen. But it wasn't until I watched the TV series The Crown, where that was quite an eye-opener, and watching that gave me a new insight. But it was a wonderful thing watching the TV series, because, as I just said, I've essentially lived with her as queen all my life, learning all those little snippets of information, and what I saw in the TV program married up with the person that I thought that I knew, to a very large extent. And so, well done to the makers of the TV program, in my opinion, for getting it right. Anyway, but that's The Crown. I'm not here to advertise the TV program. But I do believe that in that program, the real Elizabeth came through, even though there was scriptwriters, sort of, what do they call it? Scriptwriters' poetic license going on. The book is never the same as the film is never the same as reality, but even so. Anyway, and I also signed up in the military, and I signed to be her servant, as it were, in the military. But there's some other things about Elizabeth that are intriguing and useful to us as Christians, because many people have made all sorts of ridiculous comments about the royal family and Elizabeth themselves, and yet she made some comments which cannot be refuted, because she did them. She made these comments to the whole country on television during Christmas messages. Now, I've got a couple of quotes of what interests us today. So in 2014, during that Christmas message, direct to camera, she said this, and I quote, "To many of us, our beliefs are of fundamental importance." Forgive me, I'm not going to try and do the voice. "For me, the teachings of Christ and my own personal accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to lead my life. I, like so many of you, have drawn great comfort in difficult times from Christ's words and example." So she's reading the Bible. She loves the Lord, obviously. She is taking comfort from the things that he's told, that are said within the words of the New Testament. Now, if that was a standalone comment, you might go, yeah, well, okay, she's just saying that. 2 years later, 2016, in the same broadcast on Christmas Day, she said this: "Billions of people now follow Christ's teaching and find in him the guiding light for their lives. I am one of them, because Christ's example helps me see the value of doing small things with great love, whoever does them and whatever they themselves believe." That's what Jesus told us to do. Love each other, love one another. And she says the Christ's teaching is a guiding light for their lives, and she says, I am one of them. So Christ's teaching are the thing that she aspires to, which is what a Christian should do, isn't it? Isn't it? So, all in all, with retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, I guess you could say, I'm personally convinced that she was a true Christian. In 2017, that wonderful newspaper, The Guardian, had an article about the Queen, which had in its title, it said, Queen Elizabeth II, the last Christian monarch. That's part of the title. Now, I hate to admit it, I'm sorry, but for once, and only once, I agree with The Guardian, because I think that's true. I don't think her successor, King Charles III, I don't think, no. So it's because of this I'm confident and I'm hopeful, and I'm just looking forward to the time when finally I can meet her face to face. Because I do believe that she was born again. I do believe that she was saved, and she was a Christian. Well, in fact, officially she was a Christian. She had to be, because she was the head of the Church of England. But, you know, having a title doesn't mean anything. It's what you do and how you are that count, isn't it? These are, well, we'll talk about that in our sermon, because, well, this is part of the sermon, but this is a bit of a preamble to the sermon. Well, she had lots of qualities, I believe. She had lots of qualities, and there was something about Elizabeth that made her special. Now, we're not going to go on about Elizabeth all the time, because I want to make a comparison with another queen. You see, the qualities of a Christian shine through. The qualities of one who follows the Lord should shine through. And we're going to talk about another queen. Only this one was born about 2,500 years ago. And her name, she was a Jew, and her name was Esther. So if you've got your King James, grab it now and find the book of Esther. Because today, I want to pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Great Britain. And as I do so, we're going to talk about Esther. We can't look at the whole book of Esther, we're not going to, we haven't got time for that. But we can pick out some of the highlights, and we need to know something of the story, because we need to see, what did Esther actually get up to? Who was she? What did she do? Let's have a look. So, our first reading will begin in chapter 2. So, just as a bit of a background, if you like, Israel was in captivity. They'd been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and carted off to all points of the compass into the Persian Empire, as it became. And at the time of this story, it was now a Persian king called Ahasuerus. He was looking to replace his wife. His wife Vashti had done something really stupid in chapter 1. You can read that for yourself. But essentially, she was out of the picture. And this first passage we're going to read a few. It introduces Esther and her uncle, whose name was Mordecai. So let's read, starting at chapter 2, Esther chapter 2, verse 5. It reads, Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So we'll pause our reading there, and we can see from this first scripture, we can see that Esther, it tells us that Esther was a very beautiful girl, very beautiful woman, fair and beautiful. Fair meaning, I guess, fair of skin, I guess. This was a bonus for royalty. It always has been for some strange reason. People in other countries, other than Britain, that is, everybody in Britain wants a suntan, but people in Eastern countries, they really like the idea of having very fair skin. It's sort of attached to royalty in some way. Anyway, she was fair and beautiful, and something must have been in her that she gained favour from everybody she met. So there must have been more to do than with her than just looks. Maybe we'll find out what that is. Who knows? Now, if we go quickly, we notice at the end of that passage, it says in verse 10, it says that Esther has been told. Mordecai says, keep quiet about the fact that you're a Jew. Just zip it. Alright? Let's carry on reading. Now we're going to go to we jump down to verse 15, which reads, Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favour in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all women, and she obtained grace and favour in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set his royal crown upon her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, you've got to look at this and think, what on earth has this girl got that everybody doesn't have? She obtains favour in the sight of all them that looked upon her. And you might think, oh, there's something fishy going on here. Witchcraft? Occult? Is she putting spells on people? There's nothing in here that says anything like that. And yet, something about this woman shone from her, obviously. So much so that the king fell in love with her. You've got all these beautiful women from every corner of the Persian Empire, and yet this one woman, this Jewish girl, is the one that attracts the king, so much so that he marries her. Sounds like almost instantaneously, really. I'm sure it wasn't like that. But so, I want to find out, what is it that so, or was it, that was so appealing about Esther? Meanwhile, her uncle did something rather important. He'd been roaming around outside near the king's gate, and he'd overheard two king's officials, plotting to kill the king. Assassination attempt. Well, of course, Mordecai, being the kind of man he was, he went and reported it to the authorities. They found these two guys and they hung them. That's the short version. But basically, this was written down in the King's Chronicles, so Mordecai did this and saved the king's life. But for some strange reason, the king didn't get to hear about it. Maybe he had an off day, he was off visiting his, I don't know what he was doing, but he obviously didn't hear about this incident. So we've learned about that. Now that's another thing. And another thing we need to know about in this story is there's a bad guy. And the bad guy in this story is a fellow called Haman. And he hated the Jews. We don't know why. He just did. He plotted then to destroy all the Jews in the whole kingdom. The whole of Persia. Can you imagine how many people that is? And all you people who keep going on about the Holocaust and what happened in World War II, just get your heads around this, okay? And please stop bleating on about what happened in Germany and so on, and get your head around the fact that this guy wanted to kill every single Jew in the whole of the Persian Empire, thus putting an end to the Jewish nation forever. Because they were never going to, if there was none of them left, they were never ever going to go back to Judah or Israel. No chance. Anyway, he petitioned the king that all these people, he didn't actually tell him that they were Jews, I don't think. He petitioned the king that all these people in the land didn't follow his laws, and they were being very naughty, and they needed to be dealt with. Well, he persuaded the king, but being, shall we say, economical with the truth. Yeah. So the king gave permission to say, right, these troublemakers, get them out of the way, just get rid of them, destroy them. And Haman's going, wonderful, thank you, king. And that was the plot, to kill every single Jew in existence. Okay, so there we are, there's the story so far. Let's get back to the word and read a bit more from Esther. So we're going to go to chapter 4. We'll start at verse 4 of Esther. You may also hear my thunderstorm above, I don't know if you can. We get them regular. It's what I call thunder o'clock or rain o'clock at the moment. Anyway, Esther chapter 4 verse 4, which reads, so Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. Then, it being the plot to kill all of the Jews. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon him, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews, to destroy them. And he also gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she would go in unto the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Now again Esther spake unto Hathach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and the father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded. Well, obviously we can see at first Esther is shocked at what's happened, but that didn't last long. She's afraid, but she's only afraid initially because she knows that she's going to be, well, there's a very good chance that she could die as a result of simply trying to see the king. But she formulates a plan. As soon as Mordecai says, look, if you don't, basically what Mordecai was saying is that if you don't do it, then someone else will. And if it's the someone else that does the right thing, your family is going to be dead, gone, finished. Realizing this, she immediately, as they say, gets on her horse and rides. It's right, okay, let's make a plan. And she did. So what does this tell us about Esther? She's human, obviously, she's afraid the same as the rest of us, but it didn't take much to get her to overcome her fear, did it? She had such a big heart for her people. That was, I think, one of her motivators. She loved her people. And let's face it, Mordecai said, if you notice, we go back there, he says, maybe you're, what does it say? And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? In other words, maybe you're the person that's in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. Yeah? So we can also see she gets on with it. She takes responsibility. Not only is she queen, but she knows that she has a responsibility to her people, and her people meaning people of her religion, the Jews. And she's able to make decisions, and she's courageous, obviously. To overcome your fear like that is no easy thing. Most people would just say, yeah, it's okay, thanks. I'll let somebody else do it. Yeah. Now at this point I just want to stop for a moment and sort of press pause, because I want to go back and look at our dear departed Queen Elizabeth. There is a bit of a comparison here. I wanted to point out, because you may not be aware of Elizabeth's history. When she was 21, during the wartime years, she was working as a motor mechanic, would you believe, in a motor pool. The Americans call them motor pools. What do we call them? I forgot. MT yard, motor transport yard. Anyway, she was working on vehicles, repairing wagon engines and things like that. Okay, so she wasn't on the front lines during the war, but she's in uniform and she's serving her country as princess at the time. And it wasn't. She carried on throughout the war doing this kind of work, and it wasn't until she was 25 that she found out. And she was at this time she was out on a trip in Kenya doing a royal tour as princess, and her father back in England suddenly died. That's George IV, and instantly she is thrust into essentially the role of queen. Now you could say that Elizabeth was the right person at the right place at the right time. She might not have thought that, because can you imagine this young woman who knows that she's first in line for the throne, but expects her father to be living for many, many years to come? And it was something that perhaps she hadn't really expected so soon. And she's the one that the crown falls onto, essentially. But okay, the comparison is mine, but maybe we don't know enough about Elizabeth yet to be able to say, is she anything like Esther? Well, we'll find out. Let's get back to Esther's story then. Chapter 5 this time, starting at verse 1, which reads, Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favour in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden sceptre that was in his hand. So Esther drew near, touched the top of the sceptre. And the king said to her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given thee to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. And the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. And Esther answered, then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favour in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he not stood up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home he sent and called for his friends, and Zeresh his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches, and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Never show off his Haman, isn't he? Now, unknown to the king, Haman had built gallows for hanging Mordecai. That was his plan. He was so happy that he wanted to see the end of his enemy, Mordecai. But little did he know that it was going to go badly. Anyway, strangely and weirdly, during that night, we don't know how, we're not told, but particularly, the king found out, maybe he was doing a bit of midnight reading, he was having a snack at 3 in the morning, who knows? Okay, he found out that Mordecai had saved his life from those murderous plotters, if you mentioned them earlier on. And he was absolutely over the moon with Mordecai. He thought he was brilliant now. Yeah, he thought, oh, what a wonderful guy. Still didn't know that he was a Jew. That forms part of the story, which we can't really get into. But let's go back to the book. Esther chapter 7 this time, starting at verse 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther, the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favour in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Now let's jump down to verse 10. I like this verse. Verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Now, notice, this is the time when Esther reveals that she is a Jewess. And it's this one simple revelation that literally not only saves her own life, but saves the lives of every single Jew that's in captivity in Persia. Her entire race. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but we need to ask a question here. Is that, how is it possible that if she was in this position, or that she gained and become queen and so on, and everybody thought she was wonderful, if she had gained this by deception or by knowing something that she needed to be in that position in order to do something, if that would have meant that she would have had to know what was going to happen to these Jews in advance. She would have had to have known that she needed to do all of these things. Does that would make her a clairvoyant, wouldn't it? That would make that she could see the future. There's two options. Three options actually. One option is that she hadn't got a clue. Another option is that she was in fact a clairvoyant. Or 3, someone had given her a vision of the future. Let's move on. Could she see the future? Did she manipulate herself into that position of becoming queen for this time? It seems a bit far-fetched, really, doesn't it? But God can do amazing things. Well, we were talking about earlier on about this something. What is it that Esther has? She has something that draws people to her, that makes people like her, and so on. We're never told directly what that is, are we, in this story? Is all of this a coincidence? You see, the story of Esther continues with the salvation of all of the Jews, and they are all saved. They're all prevented from being murdered, and the tables are turned on those people who were going to help Haman to put his plan into action. So they all get captured and killed, along with Haman. But Esther's not finished yet. she has a final petition from the king in our story. So we go to Esther chapter 9 now, and we'll start at verse 12, which reads, "And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee, or what is thy request further, and it shall be done. Then said Esther, If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons." Now, here we've got Esther being, shall we say, forward-thinking. She's got this strategic thing. She knows full well that if these 10 sons of Haman are let loose and to roam around, all they're going to do is cause more and more trouble, and people are going to die, and her own people are going to basically suffer because of these men. So she uses her position and has them put to death. That's 10 men versus several 100,000, maybe 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. We're not sure. I don't know how many Jews were scattered among the Persian Empire. But this gives us more insight into Esther, doesn't it? It tells us something. It tells us, what does it tell us? It tells us that she's determined to make sure that her people are protected no matter what. She's dedicated to the people and determined. And let's face it, she did another thing that you could learn is that she wasn't doing it by deception or by lying, no tricks up her sleeve. She was an honest woman. So we've learned quite a bit, I think we've learned quite a bit about Esther. But we still haven't figured out what is that something. Have you figured out what it is yet? I'll bet you have. Yeah? That thing that was in her that made her stand out from all these other people, all these other beautiful women. It's obvious, isn't it? The one thing that is completely absent from the whole of the book of Esther is God. Or rather, mention of God directly. But God is there all the way through. The fact is that Esther is a devout Jew, as is Mordecai. You can see that from the fact that when you go back to what we were reading earlier, how Esther instructed her people, her servants and so on, or others, to fast for 3 days and 3 nights, and she did the same herself, and for Mordecai to do that as a means of, what is that for? Well, it's the way that they have been taught throughout their Jewish tradition, how to approach God when they desperately needed his help. That's what it's for. That's what it was for. So God is there. And again, we go back to this idea of, I mentioned earlier, about does Esther know about what's coming in the future? Did she have a vision from God? Or is she just being completely obedient to the word of God, to his prompting through whatever means which we are not told? God is there. And I think the thing that is missing, that's something that we were trying to understand about Esther, is that it's God in her heart. You see, we've been looking at the characteristics, the personality, if you like, of of Esther to see what kind of person she, and what things that she did. And the things that we see, and if you look in the New Testament, you'll and look for the kind of characteristics that we've been talking about, what you will see is that actually they fit very well with the fruit of the Spirit. The love that she has for others, for her people. This is an outworking of the Holy Spirit within. So what we see is a woman who is extremely strong in her faith. She has a great big heart and love for other people. She has deep compassion for them. And she's determined, strong, courageous, with a deep sense of duty and a dedication to, of her entire life to the cause or salvation, if you like, of her people. So there we have it. And now I want to flip the coin back to Queen Elizabeth and say, although Elizabeth wasn't in captivity, she was. She wasn't in a prisoner, but she was. She was thrust into a crown, or a crown thrust upon her. She couldn't say no. She could have, if she wanted, but she didn't. She stuck with it for 70 years until her death. 70 years of being a monarch when she could have just been an ordinary housewife. But she didn't. Deep sense of duty. Courageous. Determined to do her duty. She had a deep compassion and love for all the people around her. Maybe she wasn't too terribly good at showing it to maybe Charles, but she had that compassion for the people of Great Britain. So we have a lot to be thankful for in Elizabeth. And we, as Christians, have, she has been an example to us all, just like Esther was an example. Elizabeth has been an example to us about how we should be and live our lives as Christians, dedicated to the Lord, to following his ways, and a particular life. Now, there's only going to be one king or one queen at any one time, so we have our own responsibilities as Christians to follow in that example. I personally thank God for Queen Elizabeth, her dedication to her people, which she put before herself, even before she was queen. She exemplified what it means to be a Christian. She wasn't like you or I. She lived a different life to you and me. But it doesn't matter what your life is, where you are. You're a king or a queen, a CEO, a director of a company, or you push a barrel of fruit. You push a wheelbarrow of fruit down the street. As a fruit seller. We have them here in the Philippines. Yeah. It doesn't matter who you are. It's how you live your life, not who you are. Anyway, so you'll forgive me my stroll down this kind of memory lane, but I hope that it serves to help you to see that we individually as Christians, we have a responsibility to be courageous, to have that sense of duty, to follow the teachings of Christ, to love everyone around us. With that, I will leave you, and I thank you for joining me today, and I hope the rain didn't come through, the thunderstorm didn't come through too loudly Maybe you didn't even hear it, I don't know. But I did. So thanks a lot, and we will see you again the next time. God bless, and may the Lord